Greetings, Culture Warriors. This is Jeff Vieira, the author of Culture is Everything, welcoming you to another edition of our Dispatches from the Front podcast. Today I've got an interesting story, another one that's coronavirus related to talk to you about, and hopefully an interesting perspective on it as we take a look at company culture and view news and events through that light. So let's get started. This one here is from Fox Business. The title of it is Businesses Struggle to Lower Workers Away from Unemployment. Subtitle, the complication may mean that reopening will not go as quickly or as smoothly as some elected officials had hoped. So let's get into it. Businesses looking for a quick return to normal are running into a big hitch. Workers on unemployment benefits are reluctant to give them up. That's complicating plans to reopen states and get the U.S. economy back on track. For some workers, unemployment benefits are now paying more than their old jobs did. For others, safety concerns or a lack of childcare, as most schools and daycare centers remain closed, are making them hesitant to go back. That means reopening may not go as quickly or as smoothly as some elected officials and business owners had hoped. Friday's jobs report is expected to show U.S. employers cut 21.5 million jobs in April, or the equivalent of all the jobs added in the past decade. That's since the Great Recession and the financial crisis in 2008. The longer it takes to recover that lost employment, the more extended the economic downturn caused by the pandemic will be. That's going to get in the way of any real recovery, said Douglas Holtz-Eakin, president of American Action Forum and former director of the Congressional Budget Office. Ilona Luce-Fina, who was laid off from her job as a bartender at the airport in Ithaca, New York, said she hopes her boss doesn't call her back too soon. I was crying at work to leave, but then as time went on and I did receive benefits, it was like, wow, I'm getting more than when I worked there, Ms. Luce-Fina said. The pressure for businesses to staff back up is especially intense as many have tapped federal loans contingent on paying employees. The government's Paycheck Protection Program forgives the loans if companies bring back all workers within 8 weeks of receiving funds that can be used to pay operational expenses such as payroll and rent. For Julie Crowley, Ms. Luce-Fina's employer, the clock is ticking. Ms. Crowley, who owns Trip Hammer Wines and Spirits and co-owns Ithaca Coffee Company, received a federal loan. She said that over the next 7 weeks, she needs to hire back 12 workers still laid off from both businesses. Congress passed a coronavirus stimulus package in March that boosted unemployment benefits by $600 a week. About half of all U.S. workers stand to earn more if laid off than they did at jobs before the pandemic, until that increase expires at the end of July. Ms. Crowley paid Ms. Luce-Fina $12.50 an hour. By itself, the $600 weekly bonus equates to working full-time at $15 an hour. Ms. Luce-Fina, who lives with her 2 teenage daughters and pays $16.50 a month in rent, said she has so far received 2 weekly payments of $816 each in unemployment benefits since being laid off on March 26. She had worked weekends as a face painting artist at a children's entertainment company, but the pandemic has stopped that business too. She says she now fears going back to work at the airport and risking coming into contact with infected people. Ms. Crowley, meanwhile, is facing financial pressure to get her business back up and running. She said she understands the position of workers like Ms. Luce-Fina, but also worries about what happens when her loan runs out at the end of June. Do you call your employees back and expect them to take a pay cut and be a happy camper, said Ms. Crowley. People are all going to do what's in their best interest. It's in my best interest to get them back on my payroll. Some governors, like Iowa's Kim Reynolds and Nebraska's Pete Ricketts, have said that furloughed employees who are called back full-time can no longer receive unemployment benefits. The South Dakota Department of Labor and Regulation issued a fraud warning last month after several employers informed the state The workers receiving benefits had refused to return to work after being called back. Marcia Hultman, the state's labor and regulation secretary, said she issued the warning because so many people are requesting benefits for the first time. The intent of the unemployment insurance program at any time is temporary assistance until you can return to work. Most states typically provide 26 weeks of unemployment benefits, but in response to the pandemic, states will be allowed to provide 13 additional weeks of federally funded assistance. States with high unemployment may extend benefits further. Under the federal government's Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, states can provide benefits to workers who are self-employed or who otherwise wouldn't qualify for regular unemployment compensation. In Pittsburgh, Les Neely, who co-owns a business that makes and sells residential awnings and tarps to trucking companies, said 3 employees he had brought back to work asked recently if they could work a rotating schedule with coworkers who were laid off so they could take turns receiving unemployment benefits. All right, so a lot to unpack in that particular story. First off, unemployment is at unprecedentedly high levels we haven't seen since at least the Great Depression, and they're still ticking up. We just had an unemployment rate in April which was 24 times higher than any single month unemployment rate had been going back through the Great Depression. Okay, so the consequence of the lockdown has been the elimination of many jobs. I think it goes without saying. There's now 33 million Americans applying for benefits. With a population around 360 million, that's almost 10% of the entire population. And obviously not all of the population is of working age. And not all of the people of working age are seeking unemployment benefits. Some may be long-term out of the workforce, and unemployment benefits do not apply. So we've got staggering numbers of people who are out of work at the moment. Small business is the number one employer of Americans. We saw a recent report that said that 52% of American small businesses believe they will be out of business within the next 6 months. In order to help, the federal government has augmented unemployment benefits fairly significantly. The reason is pretty clear. It's because with that many people out of work, they're going to have difficulty paying rent. They're going to have difficulty paying their mortgage. They're going to have difficulty buying food. And without some form of assistance now, we could be facing a real catastrophe later. We're already seeing, for example, the impact of some of these layoffs in the form of food shortages. Our supply chain is set up for a steady flow of food into the restaurant sector. Restaurants are closed. There is no restaurant sector anymore. There's a few businesses that have drive-thrus and curbside service that have managed to stay open, but for the most part, there's been a lot of dead demand, and that's messed up the supply chains. You hear stories of farmers dumping crops because they've got no one to sell them to, because the old buyers are sitting at home right now. Okay, so the government comes out with a program that says, look, in order to stave off this massive wave of layoffs that's been caused because of a cash crunch, because of all the disruption across the economy. You know, what's the first thing that happens when a company starts looking down the barrel of a great deal of uncertainty and change? Well, they hold on to cash. And as they hold on to cash, they stop paying their vendors. And that causes their vendors to see a big contraction in their cash flow, and they start holding on in cash, and it works up the supply chain that way. So the government is trying to get businesses to kind of hold on through a rough patch by saying, look, we'll give you a loan. We'll even forgive that loan as long as you don't lay people off. As long as you don't react to this crisis by reducing your workforce, particularly permanently. But to do that, you've got to bring back the people you laid off. Because the benefits in order to help the people that have been laid off are generous, more generous than historically they have been, you have a large number of people, over half according to this particular article, who are in fact making more money sitting at home right now than they were making before. They're in a better financial condition than they were before they were laid off. It's just a fact. As the business owner in the article notes, these people are not acting irrationally. They are acting rationally in their best interest. They're taking a short-sighted view because, of course, even if this program goes on for the 26 weeks plus an additional 13 weeks, that's 3/4 of a year, even if that's the case, in the process, we're going to see so many businesses go under that there will be nothing to return to in 3/4 of a year. And what are you going to do when the money runs out? Who is going to pay for all this? The debt and the deficit are at historically high levels now. We're entering unprecedented areas in terms of futures on U.S. bonds as a result. The bill is going to come due for all of this. And the question is, who is going to pay it? So you can't blame workers who are making more than they may ever have, and they're getting to spend the time with their families. The other problem that we have, of course, is that for working parents, childcare is an issue. Many a company has a daycare center affiliated with it. Those daycare centers are now closed. Schools for school-age children serve the purpose of at least having the child in a safe place during the school day where the parents can work. Those schools are now closed. And that's going to present a problem because you need someone to watch the children. So if both parents are working, or one parent's working and the other is laid off, and there's no child care, well, what are you going to do? Perhaps there is other family that could be watching the children, but remember, especially in many families today, those relatives tend to be older. They tend to be grandparents, and we are being very strongly discouraged from bringing the children to the grandparents for fear that they will be infected with this virus. So in light of this, we have a little bit of a quandary. And I'd argue that more than that, we have an issue with culture. Because lurking in the background of all of this discussion and these problems, these issues, there's a very real question about values. Values on the part of the company and the company's owners and what they want to do, and values on the part of the employees and what they want to do. And what we're seeing is a separation in those values. We're not on the same page here. Okay. First and foremost, I think the company owners would like to survive. They would like to have the business continue as an ongoing concern. They do not want to close the doors. They do not want to lay themselves and everyone else off. They do not want to have a fire sale on their assets. They do not want to see the business that they built over their lifetime, in many cases, go away. So they're looking They're very much in survival mode. They're looking for a way to keep going. These federal loans are a way not to make a profit for them, but simply to keep going. They're already taking a hit. And the longer this goes on, the bigger that hit will be. They're dealing with the fact that they don't know if they'll be able to reopen. And when they do, let's face it, if they're forced to follow social distancing rules, then they're going to see an ongoing long-term hit to the amount of cash they can bring in. Why? Because there'll be fewer customers spread further apart. So you're going to have all the cost of attending to those customers, and you're not going to be able to turn the revenue from them as much or as quickly as you did before. It's going to be a problem. In some cases, there's a number of businesses that were operating on the edge before this that are going to turn from profitable to unprofitable. There's no two ways about it. So the owners are trying to have their businesses run. Even in the cases where you have company leadership which are not owners, they're trying to keep the company from going bankrupt and having the consequences of that. Even if they have sufficient cash to at least pay everybody for the moment, then they're going to be worried about something else, which is hostile takeovers. Because you have a number of countries out there who are not operating under shutdown conditions, who have not handicapped their businesses, and they continue to grow. Everyone's taken somewhat of a hit because of the impact of trade, but there's a great disparity in terms of the economic impact to companies out there across the globe. Those companies are going to get stronger, and where you have international business in an industry, well, they're going to use their cash to acquire some new assets, which are going to be companies that are undergoing enormous financial strain. So leadership of corporations in this country are operating with an eye towards preventing that from happening. Sources of wealth are drying up. So now you're looking at, whereas previously it was not that difficult to get capital for your business, as long as you had a decent business model, those sources are tightening up. Cash is life. And if you can't get the cash you need, your business is going to be under tremendous strain. You have strong governmental push and probably a strong drive from your own values to try to limit the impact to your workforce as much as possible. But let's face it, labor is typically the biggest cost you've got. Okay. So owners are operating in this environment with a ton of fear, stress, and anxiety. Company leadership is in the same boat. You know, even if you do layoffs, they have to be pretty deep in most companies, and you've got to figure out how you're still going to service the customer, assuming the customers come back once the lockdowns are lifted. Okay. So now the company's values are kind of being viewed through this lens of fear, and security, stability are edging out some other things. Okay. On the part of the employees, values have shifted as well. In this environment, it's very difficult to pursue your normal course of action, even if you're still working. It's easy to get distracted. You know, when you start to have to worry about what time you can go to the supermarket in order to get meat for your family, which is something that Americans have never had to do, then that takes time away from what you're doing the rest of the day. You're probably covering multiple jobs right now because of the impact of the layoffs. You may find in other areas there's not a lot of work going on because there's not a lot of customers to service. So all of this can test your previously held values, particularly if you believe in the vision of your company and you're trying to help them forward that vision. And this also exposes that perhaps when we designed our cultures, if we designed our cultures, perhaps we didn't have the right values in place. Perhaps we had some things that were articulated, which in the end turned out to be not quite so important. And we left some things unsaid that perhaps should have been clearly articulated. We may have misapplied resources in areas that turned out not to be that important. So you take a look across the space when you're looking for articles on company culture, for example, when you're doing research on things. And you'll find a lot of stuff about the work area. Do we put a ping pong table in? Do we offer free snacks? What kind of furniture is the most comfortable? Can I put bean bags down? When you look back on those things now, you realize how silly that all was. Because it's not bean bags, and it's not ping pong tables, and it's not access to free snacks, which makes your employees productive, which makes your business run. It's something far more essential. It's buy-in to what the company is trying to do, collaboration among its members, and it's a resiliency and a flexibility to deal with things, even unprecedented events such as this, as they arise. There's a common bond between workers at a company that has to be nurtured. And if everyone's hunkering down in their homes, and if they're not being paid enough that unemployment is a real temptation for them, and if they're not wed enough to what the company is trying to do, if they don't have enough of their own identity invested in the company, then yes, you're going to have difficulty, even in a crisis, retaining them because, well, they'd rather spend the time at home. But if you've built the right culture, if you've taken a group of human beings and bonded them under a common vision, and you look out for one another, you take care of one another, and you care about one another beyond 9 to 5, then you'll see something different. And I think what you'll see is that in the case of that company owner in the article who was finding it difficult to get their employees to come back, I think you'd see something along the lines of, look, we are here to help make this work. We want this company to be around so that our kids can join it and work for it. And it will provide for them as well as us. And we'll get through this together. And if that means that for the next 13 to 26 to 39 weeks, if that means that I'm drawing my salary, and I know there are other people out there who are drawing unemployment, they're making a little bit more, so be it, because I'm building for my future here. I'm not going to just run on the treadmill for the next 39 weeks and see what happens next. It's a very different set of values. This is not to fault the people who've decided for very rational reasons that, hey, unemployment is a better deal for me right now, and I'll think about my next thing once we get through this crisis. It's not to belittle them at all. It's just to say that one of the benefits of building a strong company culture is that you also foster that strong bond, that unbreakable bond between people who comprise the company. And it requires sacrifice on both management and employees in order to hold on to that bond and make it as strong as possible. We are all suffering in the current state of circumstances. Even folks who are still gainfully employed, even in those industries where business is booming at the moment because of the crisis. You know, you think about healthcare supplies, you think about the supply chain companies, e-commerce. They're all doing very well at the moment. Okay? But again, when you look at the amount of pain that's out there across the country right now, and you realize that eventually it will get around to every company. Even in Amazon, which saw a huge uptick in its e-commerce orders as, people tried to stay home and still had needs. Even they've been suffering from the fact that trying to keep up with the pace of those orders in a social distancing environment, it is extremely difficult. And it has to have driven their cost up as well. So we may not all, see the immediate consequences of it in some industries and some companies, but the longer this goes on, we'll see it everywhere. You'll find it very difficult to get certain products. If the response to China's involvement in this is to stop sourcing from China, we're going to have to rebuild all those supply chains. We're going to have to rebuild the manufacturing capability. And to do that, we're going to have to attract people. So if you're a business owner, if you're leadership at a company, and you need to bring people in the wake of this in order to reignite your business and to stabilize it and to give yourself a prosperous future within it, you need to think about your culture. You need to look for ways to build that unbreakable bond. Because even with so many people out of work, even with people who are going to start to get desperate and start to want to take any job offered, as soon as the crisis is past, you can bet those people will not stick around without you giving them reason to. And your culture is the best reason for them to stay. Because your culture is bigger and more important than incidentals like free snacks, like pretty furniture, even at a certain level to the amount that you pay. So coming out of this crisis, it will behoove all of us to take a little time for reflection, look at how our company has performed through the cultural lens, and start making some changes. Where we've got the wrong values, let's get the right ones. Where we've perhaps hired for people in the past who didn't buy into our culture and who tended to draw others away from it, well, let's not bring them back or folks like them. Where we've not paid enough attention in recruiting to find people who will be a good fit for our culture, let's change that. Forget that dusty old job description someone wrote back in 1976 and has just been updated to the latest version of Office as a skill. Let's instead start thinking about who are the people who are going to, when the chips are down, who are going to come back to work because they love what they do, they love the people they do it with, and their level of commitment is so strong that they can be relied upon even in the worst of times. That's the dispatch from the front for today. May 8th, 2020. Have a great day.